Thanks, Ms. Kim. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Casten, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McLaughlin, first I just want to state the obvious. You currently have systems in place, right, to block, freeze, reject any transactions and report them to OFAC if they're done by shady characters, sanctions evaders, child traffickers. Is that a broad yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm glad to hear it. You'd be in trouble if you said anything else. Tomorrow, the committee is going to mark up stablecoin legislation, which would include language to treat stablecoin issuers as financial institutions under the Bank Secrecy Act, in which case they would also have to comply with anti-money laundering, know your customer rules that you comply with as well. Is it your view that that stablecoin issuers should be subject to those same rules that you comply with, regardless of how those rules may change, that the rules shouldn't be different from one financial institution to another?
Thank you for your question. Yes, sir, I do believe any product, service, industry, or technology that is responsible for moving funds between customers or citizens has to be subject to regulation to make sure that they're protecting the customers or countries.
Okay, and since you've presumably got some experience filing SARS reports and what have you, can you speculate on what the bad guys would do if we had a stablecoin regime where all of a sudden they weren't subject to the same rules that a depositor at your institution is subject to?
Thank you again. I could speculate that the bad guys would become even more aggressive in the space in terms of targeting vulnerable individuals to defraud, steal, and abuse the customers of the stablecoin.
Well, I certainly agree. I'm glad to hear you say it. And I raise that because some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle believe that stablecoin issuers should not have to comply with anti-money laundering rules. And I guess if you're here to represent our nation's child traffickers, that's a good position to have. But I think it's important that we make sure that we keep those protections. Ms. Coven, I want to move to you just to think about what might happen if we don't have those protections in place. My understanding from your from Chainalysis 2025 crime report is that stablecoins account for 63% of all illicit transactions that you had tracked, and that sanctioned entities are increasingly using stablecoins because of the difficulty of using the US dollar. Do I have that basically right on what your 2025 report said?
Yes, sir. Stablecoins have become the currency of blockchains. They are by far the most transacted cryptocurrency today. And we support efforts to establish regulatory frameworks across stablecoin issuers. Robust, consistent standards across this growing market can ensure.
I appreciate that, but I just want to focus on the 63% of the illicit activity is done on stablecoins. And I want to understand that number because my understanding of what you can track is that you can't see the off-chain transactions, right?
Correct.
So it's 63% of the stuff that's trackable, but presumably if the bad guys know what's trackable, it might be more than 63% if you could track everything.
As an investigator, for me personally, it is a gift when illicit actors decide to dabble in stablecoins because of the traceability and also seizability midstream.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, I love the guy who robbed 7-Eleven without a mask and holds his ID up to the camera before he pulls the gun out, right? But presumably there's more there. Now, I say that because if I am a bad guy and we don't regulate stablecoins, I can imagine a scenario where I go on to, I buy some other kind of crypto, I use that to launder money, I then bring that onto an exchange that's issuing the stablecoin, convert it to stablecoin. Those are all off-chain transactions, so you wouldn't see any of that, right? If that was the means of money laundering?
We've still had spectacular seizures, including a $225 million seizure of stablecoins associated with the scam fund. So scammers know it's visible and traceable, but are still taking the risk to dabble in it.
No, and I'm not saying this to criticize Chainalysis. I'm just saying that because you're not tracking the off-chain, if I bought another crypto, went on to an exchange where the exchange was issuing this, because the exchanges run their own ledgers, right? And so you don't see that stuff, right?
Yes,
and that's like, I mean, you'd mentioned Guarantex earlier, but my understanding is that like Guarantex loves Tether because they can do all that sort of stuff and bypass the system. And even though hopefully we're clamping down on Guarantex, you could still do that inside other exchanges and not track that, right?
Absolutely. That's why regulatory frameworks that put standards on those cryptocurrency businesses to understand all this, the swapping that's going on are
Well,
imperative.
I really appreciate your expertise. I'm out of time, and just a marker for tomorrow. Let's make sure we don't make things easier for the bad guys. Yield back.